being in the mafia has, women love it. People like it. You have a certain way of carrying yourself, and you are protected by certain people. And in those neighborhoods, those people are still important people. So I think there's a matter of prestige. Someone like Fat Tony Salerno. Fat Tony was a guy who made more money than any mob boss ever. There's nobody more wealthy than him. This is a guy who was probably making 50 to 100 million dollars a year in the 60s. This is a guy who literally ran every numbers bank in New York City. They were kicking up to him at one point. Just made an insane amount of money, had a lot of power, but he was the front boss of the Genovese crime family.
This is a special interview today for Young Atlas. I got a special guest. I'm a big fan of everything mob history and all of that. Favorite movie is probably Casino, then Godfather 1, then 2. So I'm excited. I watch a lot of his content. Who do I have with me today?
This is Jeff Nadu. I'm the host of The Sit Down. It's a podcast about the mafia and organized crime. You can find me on Spotify, iTunes, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get your content. I really am trying to inundate myself with just kind of put myself out there, telling the stories of the people that you referred to in the films. Some of those people were real people. I'm trying to tell the real stories of the American mafia in America. So thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. So just to jump right into it, give me a little background, like how'd you grow up, where you from, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm from Pennsylvania. I live in a town called Lancaster. It's about an hour west of Philadelphia. I actually, growing up, I was just a regular kid, really. I mean, you know, typical normal kid, suburbia. I would say that I was definitely influenced by urban culture, I would say. I was always interested in watching films like State Property and Paid in Full and things like that. But one thing that I always had an interest in, and I remember as a child, my father, he would watch. I don't know if you know, like if you remember on A&E, they used to do a show called Biography, and they would do like just an hour long look into someone's life. It would be generally criminals a lot of the time, and I remember my father used to watch it every night, and I would go into his room that he'd watch TV, and occasionally they would do mob episodes. It would be like on John Gotti or Al Capone or something, and I remember my parents were big Sopranos fans as well. They watched it from season one on, and I'd always found interest in it. I would sit outside of their bedroom and I'd watch it. I was like 11, 12 years old. And then when I was about 15, I saw the Gotti HBO film, and I consider that the best mob movie of all time. And I just always really been interested in the mafia. And my content career kind of took me all different ways. I actually my bread and butter in content has always been sports betting. I've done sports betting content really since I started in this in 2009. I built up a following. I built up social media. I eventually worked at a company called Barstool Sports, and eventually I just kind of stumbled in and told myself in 2021 I wanted to start a podcast not about sports, and I thought, well, why not do the mob stuff? I always had been interested in it, and I really just kind of jumped in and did it, man. And now we're here.
No, that's amazing. So you were pretty close to Philly, I think, and those biographies, I think they did one on like the Philly mob or like Nicky Scarfo, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, I've seen it. I think there was a Nicky Scarf episode. They may have done one on like the war between John Stanfa and Jerry Molino. And what's interesting is when I think I was 18 years old, about a week in to my 18th year, and I remember I went to my mother and father and I said, I'm moving, and they thought I was crazy because I had like kind of a dead end job at that time. I really had no idea what I wanted to do in life. And my father was in construction and he had his own company, and he said, why don't you come work for me? Like, why are you doing all this stupid stuff? And I said, I need to go out and see the world a little bit. And I remember I told my parents that I'm going to move to South Philly. And why I wanted to move to South Philly, I think really probably it had to do with the fact that I was a big Eagles fan. I love sports. And I'm like, you know what? I like this neighborhood. I had some people that I knew there. I'm like, I'm going to move to South Philly. And I remember I moved there. I lived in the heart of South Philly for several years. And that was my real first look at the mob in real life, because I lived in a neighborhood that, at that time, that was like the late 2000s. It was still mob controlled. And I remember, dealing with friends and getting to know people that related to those types of people. And look, I'm no mob guy. I'm just someone that had an interest in it. I kind of saw it firsthand at one point, maybe, a guy down the street or something like that. But um, yeah, I've always just been someone that looked at the outside. I was never involved. I never claimed to be a tough guy or anything like that. I was just someone that had interest in it.
Gotcha. And so late 2000s, like we don't have to get into specifics, but
Yeah.
that's kind of like Joe Lagambi, like Joey
Yeah.
Merlino type of,
Yeah.
that time. And the Philly mob, I mean, obviously John Stamford stuff has always been full of just entertaining headlines. And it seems like a Lagambi was like your typical low key kind of guy, who,
Yeah, he really is. I mean, Joe Legambi's probably I think probably one of the more influential people of the last 20 years that we don't talk enough about. I mean, he really took the Philly mob through a lot of calm waters. I mean, as you alluded to, from 1980 until approximately 2000, so a 20-year period, the Philly mob was very violent. There were a lot of bodies in Philadelphia. Nicky Scarfo's reign was a very destructive one. The Stanford Merlino back and forth. I mean, you hypothetically, you had shootouts on the expressway. You had just kind of crazy things going on. People getting shot on corners. It was just a complete mess. And when Joey was taken off the street in the late '90s, Stanford was taken off the street in the mid '90s. They really needed someone to take it over. And Legambi is an interesting guy because not a lot of people realize he was given life in prison. He was given a life sentence in the '80s. He eventually gets out on a technicality and returns to the streets and kind of is he was kind of a low level Scarfo guy back in the '80s. If you know anything about him, he was always regarded as a terrific gambler, very good sports bettor. He was involved in a lot of illegal rackets, and he actually, allegedly did some pieces of work, and he got that life sentence, and he came home, and I think kind of said, you know what, everybody's gone. Let me assume some calm here. And what a lot of people also don't know is his nephew is a person called George Borghese, who allegedly is the current boss of the family. And they've kind of taken over some real muddy waters and taken it to some calm seas, if you will. So yeah, Joe's an interesting guy. Joe's done a lot for South Philly. I actually know when I was coming up, when I lived there, I remember I had certain friends of mine that, we were all, early 20s. They were getting jobs. Joe Legame was getting them jobs down at the Jersey Shore, and he was always kind of a good guy. I've never met him, I didn't know him or anything, but from what I had understood, he was always a real good guy.
yeah, you kind of get that vibe from him. And I feel like, that was going to be one of my questions. I wrote it down, so I'll remember it. But I wanted to just to go back to Nicky Scarfo a little bit and just to ask you a question about him. Um, Whenever I watch Casino, right, like I know, like his character, Joe Pesci's character, is based on what's his name, Tommy from
Spillatro.
yeah, Tony Spillatro from the outfit in Chicago. But I mean, there has to be some influence of Nicky. I feel like it. He's kind of a smaller guy. I don't know. It just seems like there's.
Interesting point. I think one thing that I've learned about mobsters, particularly mob bosses and high level mobsters, is a lot of them were actually quite diminutive in size. I mean, if you look into like a Carmine Galante, Carmine was a very short individual. I think it's just really that kind of little guy that has a lot of power behind him. But yeah, I could see it. Nicky was a guy who I think a movie should be made on in any right about him. Nicky was a fascinating, very bloodthirsty, destructive person, and I once made a list of the worst mob bosses of all time, and my 1-2 were John Stanfa and Nicky Scarfo. Philly's definitely had some good bosses, obviously Angelo Bruno and Joseph Legambi, but they've had some pretty bad ones as well. In fact, horrifically bad ones. So yeah, I don't think there's any influence in Tommy's or not Tommy, Tony Spillatro's character in Casino, the Nicky Santoro character, but I think those diminutive kind of bloodthirsty guys, there were a lot of those guys in American mob history.
Yeah, for sure. And going off of what you just said, because it was a really good point. Like, what do you think? Like, take me through it a little bit. Like, you got Stanfa and Scarfo on one side, and you got like a guy like you know, Joe Lagambi and Angelo Bruno on the others. Like, what makes someone a bad or a dumb mob boss compared to like a good one, would you say? What are some of those characteristics?
You had to have a really strong balance of, you know, obviously the mafia is very much you have to show force and you have to have the ability to hurt people because if people don't do what you say, you've got to have some sort of fear in them, which I think is one of the major issues the mafia has today, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But you have to have a balance, and I think it really needs to be 75% ability to lead, make money, not headlines, and you have the ability to, if you need to, take people out. The problem is the bloodthirsty people never last because the bloodthirstiness leads to the police, right? The quiet, kind of non-assuming guy that does what he has to do, doesn't make headlines, makes a bunch of money. And look, if you need to do what you got to do, you do what you got to do. But the people that are obsessed with hurting people, generally that leads to just confusion and anarchy. I've also said though that like the most influential mafia figures of all time had a really good balance of both. And the ones that were just all hurting people, they just don't last very long. I mean, a lot of them become revolutionaries where they don't want to listen to authority. And the one thing that's majorly key about the mafia is you don't go against what they want. If they tell you to do something, for instance, in terms of like a Carmine Galanti wanted to sell narcotics and he got to the point where he was going off crazy. He wasn't listening to people. He was trying to take over the whole thing for himself. The mafia doesn't like people that get out of line. And if you get out of line, they're going to put you in line. So you have to have a good balance. And Nikki and John Stanfa had no balance. They were all just bloodthirsty and they wanted to hurt people. And I mean, you look at Stanfa, I mean, he did nothing to further the American mafia in Philadelphia. He was making people that weren't even Italian. He really had no huge money maker as far as sources of income. They were both just him and Scarfo, just kind of crazy lunatics.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And s speaking of like, and I know there's probably a couple of names, but like, who do you think was like the most successful mob boss of all time?
Oh, wow. So I look, I think in terms of like a Mount Rushmore type of thing, I think someone like obviously Carlo Gambino,
Yeah,
because in terms of like him, he was a guy who was very much could take care of you if he had to. But you look at just the advancement he had with that family, taking them into different areas, kind of being the chairman of the board of everything. And again, taking what he wanted. The one thing that Carlo had is he was a little bit of a snaky kind of guy, but you have to be in that business. He wasn't the actual boss. Someone like Fat Tony Salerno. Fat Tony was a guy who made more money than any mob boss ever. There's nobody more wealthy than him. This is a guy who was probably making 50 to 100 million dollars a year in the 60s. This is a guy who literally ran every numbers bank in New York City. They were kicking up to him at one point. Just made an insane amount of money, had a lot of power, but he was the front boss of the Genovese crime family, which means that he was essentially taking all the shrapnel. So the real boss, which was Vincent Gigante, was able to operate. And in the end, I think that the goal of any mob boss is to make a bunch of money, have a lot of power, and die in your own bed. And Carlo Gambino absolutely did that. Tony Salerno did not. He died in federal prison serving 100 years. So, but at the end of the day, man, like all the people I just discussed, they have a different way of thinking than most. There's only one way out of the American Mafia, and that's a pine box 6 feet under. There's no retiring. There's no I don't want to do this anymore. That doesn't happen. And the people that we're talking about are all cut from the same cloth. They really don't make people like that anymore. Even in things like black organized crime, Spanish organized crime, really any way across the board. I think the major difference between organized crime now and in 20, 30, 40 years ago is nowadays, and I'm sure you know about this from some of the content you do, like there used to be ethics with all these people where like you don't want to call the police, you don't want to bring the police to you, so you try to limit violence there. Nowadays it's just a bunch of kids out there shooting each other, and I think at the end of the day that's really destructive for the people that are making money. There's no honor anymore, there's no ethics, there's no keeping your mouth shut. And I think that's really across the board in every type of organized crime.
No, I agree. I do think there's so much more emotion and ego, and rather,
Yes.
you know, kind of like, let's put these guns down and fight like men. Like that doesn't.
Well, it's funny. Not to labor on this, but I did on my channel. I occasionally do looks into to black organized crime with certain drug traffickers and drug trafficking organizations, and I've done videos on people like Kabani Savage and guys like that. And I recently did a look into an indictment out of a group out of North Philadelphia, where I mean the indictment was fascinating. It was essentially the leaders of the group were upset with other members of the group saying basically like, why are you so obsessed with making money? It's not about making money. We need to go out and get retribution for the people that have died in our group. And it's basically the term of like nowadays these kids don't even care about money. It's just how many bodies you can get, right? And you mentioned emotion. It's quite fascinating that like it's not even about money anymore. It's just how many people can you take out, in the course of a year or two.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I think fascinates a lot of people with the mob and organized crime in general, or just crime that they probably subconsciously don't even understand, is like, if you have someone that's powerful in some type of underworld that is really about making money and trying to keep the peace and is not necessarily a bad person, they're just trying to do the best they can do in that whatever kind of rackets they're in, that can actually cause a lot of good and peace in a neighborhood. And I don't think people realize.
Absolutely can. And we saw that with the American Mafia. I mean, we saw that. I read a book. I did a show on a guy, Montana Baronet. He was a drug trafficker out of Baltimore. He was a part of this group called Train to Go. You may have heard of him. And I read a book about him called Life Sentence. It was about his life, a short life on the street. He got a life sentence at the age of like 22. And in the book at the end, there's this older dealer, this guy that had come up and been in the neighborhood for 10, 20 years. And he was there many years before Baronet was even around. And he said, the one problem with these young kids is they really just ruined the game, right? I mean, back when we were around, we tried to keep peace. We tried to help, the people in the neighborhood. We weren't necessarily making money the right way, but we tried to make sure the young kids were out doing things the right way. And, we did what we had to do to survive and we filled the need, but we weren't out there just taking out random people. And he said the problem with these new kids today is they ruined the game for everybody else. And we even saw that in like The Wire, man, like the show The Wire. Like, you know, the guys like Marlowe, this new breed, were just, they were just depraved. They had no rules. And I think that's the real downfall of organized crime because even in the Italian mafia, like the guys today are so much different than, the people that came up in the 50s, the 60s, 70s, the 80s.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, I guess there's a lot of reasons for that. Probably pop culture, a lot of,
Yeah.
kind of the glorification. I mean, that kind of makes you think of someone like, let's say, a John Gotti, because it's like, I feel like he kind of took a lot of things into into that new era, right? Where
That's a good point. And but to even look at, like you mentioned, the kids today, like how they are, I think it really has to do, and it doesn't matter if you're whatever you are, kids, the way they're raised today is just different than, John Gotti's time. I mean, John Gotti, you have to realize, was the son of I think he had 12 brothers and sisters. He grew up in abject poverty. His father was a degenerate gambler who never could maintain work. He had to grind. He had to go out there and get it on his own. And he's out running the streets by 6, 7, 8 years old. A lot of these people, wherever you live, you get influenced by people doing crime. And nowadays kids aren't raised like that. They're raised with telephones and they have really anything they want, no matter where they live. And they don't have much in a way of, there's still no guidance, but they're being guided by the wrong things, music and things like that. It's just a different world. And this, man, like the biggest detriment to a criminal is this right here. You cannot be a criminal and use the telephone. And nowadays it's very simple to do that. And that's what serves these cases up on silver platters. The word conspiracy is the federal government's favorite word. And that's what destroyed the mob: conspiracy, the RICO Act, and wiretaps. If you're going to be a criminal, no matter what level you are, you cannot talk on the phone and you cannot talk in a building anywhere. If you do those things, you avoid that, you'll likely be okay. But yeah, kids are just raised differently now, man.
no, for sure. And I feel like the clout and one thing I like about kind of studying the mob is and just, kind of the underworld in general, not just the mob, is understanding that the low-key lifestyle can be, you can use that for total legitimate businesses, obviously. A lot of these ethics, right? Like you said, the movie Gotti, which I love that movie. I mean, my favorite scene is when Anthony Quinn's walking them into Carlo Gambino's house, and he's like, "That's how he lives, he's old school, no flash, and it's like, I don't know why, and you get it, like Gotti loved the tabloids, but it's like you have that great lesson right in front of you, and
I think
you
it's
know,
the adage of like, why be a gangster if no one knows who you are?
yeah,
And look, I think, and nowadays it's so easy to be seen by people, right? With, the social media stuff, the way it is. Look, I can't lie to you. When I go out, people recognize me occasionally. They say, "Oh, I see you on TikTok or I see you on YouTube." And like, that's cool. Like, I remember I told this story before. Like, this was maybe 6 months ago. I was out at a bar in my town. I was having a cigar with a girl that I was talking to at the time, and I remember a kid comes up to me. I never met him in my life, and he goes, "Wow, Jeff, they do." He goes, "I love you on TikTok," and I'm like, and it was cool because the girl was kind of impressed, and like that's a cool feeling. If you're a gangster on top of it, of course you want people to know who you are. And I think that's the downfall of most people. They can't be a guy that just lives in a regular nondescript house and drives a normal car. But what people don't realize is cops, this is all they do, look into people. And you live in a small town somewhere, and you're a young 20 something, you got no job and you're driving a brand new Mercedes around, you got nice clothes, you're getting bottles at the bar every week. Eventually it's not difficult to look into what you're doing and doing a little surveillance, and you're getting the feds involved and jamming you up. And nowadays they're going to hit you hard with the RICO Act. The RICO Act is the Fed's favorite tool to sending you upstate or not upstate, to federal prison for a long period of time. And nowadays as well, the gun the gun charges they can stack on top of that are really bad. I mean, if you use a gun in the commission of a drug trafficking organization, I mean, you're going to get 20 years straight up, and they're not going to send you to a summer camp. They're sending you to a USP. So, yeah, it's so hard, man, to do crime nowadays. It definitely doesn't pay. And you know what's crazy, bro? Like, it's really not even about like sitting on a phone and saying, "Hey, I got 1 kilo. Are you ready for it?" It's you could sit on a phone and the government could say that you calling your mom telling her you need some eggs and butter. they could say that's conspiracy. And if you're actively involved in the drug trade, how are you going to argue it? You know, they love those words, and they're going to do what they can to put you in. And the gangsters that we're talking about, these old prickly guys that wear polyester still, they don't make a lot of guys like that no more.
No, they don't. And I wanted to ask you this because I was talking to my dad about it, and we were talking about like he asked me, who do you think was the most successful mob boss of all time? And I said Carlo Gambino, and then I said like he lived in a really there wasn't much flash. Like, and then my dad asked a really good question. He's like, he has all that power and money. Like, what's the point if he can't even live in a mansion or something like?
Uh,
It was a good question. I wanted to maybe ask you that.
that is a great question, and I think it's something that I've always wondered too, because, and John Gotti had talked about this. At the end of the day, we're all going to jail. What are we saving up money for? And that's a great point. I guess to me, I guess you're just doing it from the standpoint of you want to make sure that 2, 3 generations from you are set, and you look at, for instance, the Gambinos, the Castellanos, the Gigantes, people like that. I mean, what's fascinating is I did a look into and again, this will connect to what we're talking about. The ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, which essentially is the union on the docks in New York City and docks everywhere in America, the port system. If you look into the New York ILA, they do a every year report. And in 2023, the Gigantes, so Chin's family, all still have jobs on the docks in 2023. They are set up for life. They're making two, three, $400,000 a year. You look at people like the Gambinos. So Carlo's son, Tommy Gambino, he passed away last year. This is a guy who is worth, probably $250 million, probably $500 million. I think the goal is setting your family up. You came up in humble times, and that's the goal. And I think at the end of the day, man, like I always say this myself, like, let's say you win the Powerball, right? Tomorrow, God forbid, knock on wood. We all still have to go to bed the same way, right? Like, how much, how ostentatious can you be? You only have one set of eyes to watch a TV. Why do you need seven TVs? You know what I'm saying? And I think there's just a level of money's great. It makes your life good, but I think you still have your own ethics and morals and the way you are. And if you know anything about Carlo, I mean, Carlo came up like any other immigrant. He came to this country with an opportunity to try to make it. And I think his goal was to try to set his family up. But it really depends who you talk to. Because John Gotti, he told his son, what's he worried about? We're all going to jail at the end of the day. And I don't think he cared much. He's spending his money on football games and horse bets. So
Yeah, no, it's a good point. That's what I said to my dad. I said, I mean, I told him like Tommy Gambino is probably worth hundreds of millions. I'm
yeah.
sure that's why. And like,
And you look at what he did with his money. I mean, this is a guy who was very involved with medical research, charities. He really did a lot of good with his money. And yeah, it's a really good question, but I think if you look at any of these old timers, man, like, I know my own, like my grandparents, they're all passed away now, but like I remember they had money, but like they wanted to live in a row home. That was just what they were into. I think it's about setting up your family, and when you go, they'll be taken care of, and then you would hope that they do that with their children, and so on.
no, for sure. That's definitely a good point. So I wanted to just ask you some quick takes. What do obviously now with uh, you said the only way to really retire from the mob is in there's no way, right? Either a casket or jail. But then there are like guys like Michael Franzese. Like, do you want to talk about that for a sec? Because it seems like he's kind of I don't know, setting the tone in a different
Listen,
way.
Michael can sugarcoat everything all he wants. Michael's a rat. There's no other way to look at it. He's an informant. He's no different than John Alite or Gene Borello or Sammy Gravano or Michael DeLeonhardt. There's no difference with Michael. Michael can dance around the subject, and I like Michael. He's been very nice to me. He shouted me out, but there is no retiring. Michael is not involved with the life anymore because he cooperated. It's really simple. Same as John Gotti Jr. They're the same person. And in fact, you can look. There are FBI files where Carmine Persco put out a hit on Michael Franzese. It's clear as crystal. And that's why Michael is retired. There is no retiring. It doesn't work like that. Michael is in it. He's lucky because the mafia is not going to do anything to him. They're not going to do anything to any of these people that cooperate. It's just that's the problem with the mafia today. They are neutered in what they can do. It's like when you have a dog and he wants to hump everybody's leg. You take that power away from him and he can't do it anymore. And the federal government has hit the mob in the legs so many times that they can't walk anymore. And their goal is to just stay alive. Um, they can't scare anybody anymore. And I think that's what's taken away from their power. On the criminal totem pole in, let's say, New York City, they're very low. They don't have the ability. Now, there are certain neighborhoods where they're still, a criminal organization. I mean, you go to 18th Avenue in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn, you're going to still see mob social clubs. There are still plenty of guys around, but um, they don't have the power anymore to prevent somebody from doing this or doing that. And people like Michael Franzese can do what they do because Michael's a smart guy and realizing that people are really interested in this sort of topic, and he's done a great job at monetizing it. But nah, there's no retiring. All the people that say they retire, if Michael wouldn't have got arrested, bro, he would still be doing all this stuff. It's convenient that he got arrested, but he cooperated. I can provide many details of that.
And because he had that gas scheme that made him a mint,
Yeah.
and that's
Which,
kind
by the way, he didn't create. He says he did. He didn't create it. It was essentially a whole family thing. Everybody had representatives in it. Now, Michael was one of the first people involved in it. And look, Michael made a ton of money. For several years, he was a huge earner. No one will take that away from him. But the thought of he left the life. I mean, if you know anything about his father, I mean, it's just it's malarkey.
yeah. Because I was watching a video you did because Sonny was obviously a smart guy, but you said like that Michael was pretty brilliant.
Was he's a very smart guy, and I think he is a guy who, if he, I always say on my show, like a lot of the people that are in the mafia, their lives were already created for them. Like if you know anything about Joey Merlino, like Joey Merlino's life was already created when he was born. His father was in the mafia. His all of his friends' fathers were in the mafia. Everybody was in it. There's no other way for him to go. And Michael Franzese's father, Sonny, was, a 10 toes down mob guy. I mean, he was out there extorting strip clubs in his 90s. I mean, he was the antithesis of the word mafia. And Michael, I think if he wouldn't have went into this line of work, I think he would have been a shrewd businessman. I think he would have been on the top of some big company.
Oh, I totally agree. So in terms of, let's go back to what you just said earlier because it was really interesting. If we're talking New York, that kind of sets the tone for the country. Like, what are the highest level of crime? Are we just talking cartels now? Like, who's the most powerful crime like organizations?
Yeah, I've said for about the last decade, I think the foregone top level crime in this country are drug cartels. I think they control most street gangs at this point. The truth is, most street gangs are working in narcotics and they're selling narcotics. They're getting it from drug cartels, either Sinaloa or Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, maybe certain other smaller groups, but they're not. It's not like there's group cartel groups in this country, but there are liaisons essentially that work as go-betweens between them. And I think in the end, when we look at a lot of murders that happen in America, a lot of them go unsolved, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are directly involved with cartel links, because I think they're taken out and it's done quickly, and that's that. But yeah, I think most street gangs at this point are overseen in some sort of a cloud type of way, like there's someone above them. They're all getting their narcotics from Mexico. So that said, other than that, I would say the premier criminal organizations are going to be, um, blood sets, trip sets. There's also a growing, different groups of different nationalities, whether it's Cambodians or Albanians or Armenians out on the West Coast. Um, but yeah, I would say at this point, most criminal street gangs are basically factions of drug cartels. They answer to somebody, so the coke they're getting, that's coming from someone in Mexico.
Yeah, and I think that goes to, especially since the pandemic, well, before that, the rise of like, fentanyl. I've lost a lot of friends to that shit, and it's just, I mean, it's really scary just how people under 40, that's the like number one killer by far. So
And I think what I've always wondered, and I think, I love talking about the mafia and organized crime, but to me, the most interesting thing that I like talking about is like the global drug trade. I find it fascinating, and I've never understood the fentanyl thing. I never have. I've never like I understand why they sell it. I mean, there's huge profit margins, and you can get so much of it, and it's so easy to move, but you're killing your customer base, and when we look at someone like Pablo Escobar, what made Pablo so much money and some of those other guys down there is all they did was cultivate a product and sell it. They weren't out there on the street selling it. They were pushing it to Mexico and then into America. And there was a direct buy for a dollar, sell for two, right? You want 5 kilos, send us this amount of money and you get it, right? And remember, the good thing about Colombia is they have a monopoly on cocaine production. You can't make cocaine anywhere other than Peru, Colombia, and certain other countries. So the monopoly was there, and now, and when we look at cocaine, so for instance, in the '80s when Griselda Blanco was selling it, people like that, cocaine, you know, if 100 people take cocaine, 98 aren't going to die, right? You're not going to die from cocaine unless you do crazy amounts of it. Nowadays, people are selling narcotics and it's killing off their customer base. It makes really little sense to me. And I have to wonder, is there going to be something more lethal eventually?
well, there already
I,
is.
yeah, of course there
They're
is.
putting
They're
they're putting
always
it's called shrank dope now. Yeah,
trank, right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like that just started. I mean, it's
And,
scary
and
shit.
and that's and you're right, and that's gonna, and we saw, the crack epidemic. We saw it existentially get worse, and I've pounded the drum on ending the drug war. I mean, it's a complete failure. It's I think the most detrimental thing facing this country. I think when we really look back and we peel the onion back, if we look at over the last 5, 10 years, some of the most important cultural times we've had, if we look into, for instance, the George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement, if we just looked at policing and how we police, that is a direct result of what we're seeing, right? If we police differently in America, we wouldn't be dealing with these little events that happen that lead to bigger things that happen. The obsession with narcotics in this country is ridiculous. And we have gotten to a point where everything that we do connects back to a failed drug war. So the way people police now is go out and just get bodies and get them off the street. We're not putting officers in positions to solve real crime. So we look at our prison population and we see that 90% of the federal prison population are nonviolent offenders. And we say to ourselves, where the hell are all the criminals? Well, they're on the street. And look at what these cities have turned into. We also aren't policing and doing real criminal investigations. So people are just out there ripping and running. And, it all leads back to the drug trade. And until we recognize that, this business will keep getting bigger and bigger. And I wish I could be president because I would change a lot of things, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
I mean, it's a great point, and like you said, the way they police it, it's like I was watching this really interesting documentary about Portugal, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
their rehab system is like they have 50% less
Well, well,
relapse.
they legalized narcotics and they said we're gonna because remember, bro, at the end of the day, if you were a heroin addict, you are going to do heroin, okay? That you don't care if it's illegal or not legal, okay? So people are doing this stuff anyway, okay? The drug war has gotten worse and worse. It's not fixed anything. If it worked and they were making menial changes, then fine, so be it. But we have seen our country get worse and worse since we started this stupid war. And if we look at it and we say, so to drugs are sold on a black market, okay? Why don't we then regulate that market where we cut out the black market and we say, if you want heroin, you can buy it from a legitimate location. We can regulate it and make sure there's not a bunch of poison in it. You can do it through an intravenous hookup into your body. And what we'll do is we'll then give you, hope that maybe you can go get a rehab. You can see all your friends that are in these safe injection sites as well. They're getting help. And then what we'll do is to solve the vacant home problem that most cities have, we'll get a bunch of developers to come in, fix them up, make them look nice, and give you the opportunity to maybe act something to our tax base by getting some help, going out and getting a job, putting you to work again. And one of the fringe benefits you get is you get, cheaper rent, and we can make our homes look better. We can make streets that are all vacant homes look better. Um, this will never happen, though. Portugal will never happen here because this country has no political capital in stopping any of this. Remember what I just said. Go to any police department in America, whether it's rural or urban, and most of the arrests they make are because of the drug trade. It's big business. And then we send these people to prison, and that's for profit as well. So again, there's a lot of business in hunting people and putting them in prison. And remember, this is the last thing I'll say on it. There's about 10 or 15% of this population in America that are completely irrelevant. They offer nothing to the tax base. They do nothing. They basically just wander around. And we don't have anything for them to do. So we've basically policed it to where we just get them off the street and we put them in jail, right? And we make money off it.
Yeah, I mean, like you can literally buy some stock in publicly traded prisons.
You absolutely can, and that's and they're federal prisons as well, and that's what makes it really pathetic. And it's and it's not a Republican Democrat thing. It has nothing to do with politics. They're all the same. Um, we have a major crime problem in this country, and a lot of it is our own doing. I mean, if you look into the Sinaloa cartel, it's a prime example, man. Like we've allowed them to operate for years. I mean, there's no we could stomp out those people tomorrow. There's no political capital in doing it because that would end the Gestapo we've created, where all this big time money, all these police departments that are so rich and doing all these big things, that would all end. Because what would you arrest people for if there were no drugs? Well, then you'd have to go out and actually get real criminals off the street, which we don't do anymore. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you have to do.
it's a sad state of affairs, man.
No, it really is. And just to briefly once talk, just talk about like rehab in Portugal too. Like the way they stop relapse rates is you don't just like, all right, here's go to detox and then do 20 days and then go back to the street. They kind of wean you back into society where it's like, hey, all right, go out to work 2 days a week. All right, now you're talking to a counselor, and then they ease you back into society, make sure you have a job and a purpose, and then you're gonna feel better about yourself rather than in America, hey, here's 30 days and then here's some pills, fuck off. It's like it's not fixing
On
it.
your I think the problem we have too, man, is and it's really not an excuse, but I mean this country is just so big. I mean, I don't even know how you would even do it. You would have to completely like if you're familiar with in the 30s, after the Great Depression happened, FDR introduced like the New Deal, which completely reinvented a society and got it going again. You would also have to it would take a generation of people to say we're not going to do this anymore. And I think the problem we have in America is people are too stingy. They don't want to help other people. They just worry about themselves. And I think we're at a point of no return. And I've often said, and I mean no disrespect. I think America's a great country. It's done a lot for me. I'm definitely a very patriotic guy, but I don't I've always envisioned living somewhere else. And I think the thought is this country in 10, 15 years, it's gonna be it's going to be in a much worse place. I don't believe we're a preeminent power anymore. I think and I look at the quality of life in other countries. It's I don't want to be a target anymore. I just kind of want to go and live in a small country that can, you look at you like health insurance and all this stuff that we have to deal with here. It really is quite pathetic, with the amount of money we have in this country that the things that we do are quite sad, man, and really evil if we're really being honest. And I always envisioned by 40, kind of being an expat somewhere. That was always my goal.
Where would you want to live?
Oh, I have a short list. Generally, the Balkans, that area, Slovenia, Croatia, that general vicinity. The Nordic countries are quite pretty. Finland. I'm Albanian, so my country is actually at this point kind of undervalued, underrated, but probably in that Mediterranean vicinity. Even like countries like the Czech Republic. Like a country like Bosnia is a really nice country now. There's a lot of beauty in kind of middle Europe. And look, there are a lot of countries in Europe that are in bad ways right now, with United Kingdom or wherever. But I think the world's beautiful, man, and I think so many people don't quite realize that. I mean, you even look at if you want to stay in this hemisphere. I mean, El Salvador is an unbelievable country at this point. It's run by a real politician who, I mean, you want to elicit change. I mean, you look at what that individual's done there. It's pretty unbelievable.
No, it is. And you know, I'm from Harlem and New York, obviously, born and bred. And yeah, I mean, I've seen I thought I would never say it. I'm the most diehard New Yorker ever. And like
You want to leave?
it's not yeah, it's not the same anymore. I mean, you know, my parents were able to, at my age, buy their own home and stuff. It's like, it's just, how many jobs do I need to have to just afford a shitty, like, you know, closet or something? You know what I mean? It's
It's
crazy.
um, it's pretty unbelievable. I've often wondered about like like someone like yourself, like why would anyone want to live? Like I've been there, many times for things that I've had to do, and I don't get it. I guess it's easy to say when you don't have to live there, but yeah, I think you'll see a time where long time, long, you're bred in New York. That's your life, and even someone like you, dead in the wool New Yorker wants to leave. It's a shame, and I think we have no one to blame but ourselves in this kind of thing, and it could be fixed quick, but I think these politicians they pretend to care, but um, I mean, it's really simple, bro. Like, no civilized country operates in certain ways like we do, right? Where in any country in the world, if you commit a violent crime, you're sent to prison, right? It's pretty simple. In this country, though, there are certain locations that you can carjack somebody, and within 12 hours, you're out. You're a smart guy. I'm a smart guy. We know what happens. Criminals don't just say, "Oh, well, I got arrested. Well, I guess I'm going to go get a job at Walmart now, or I'm going to go get a job at a mechanics now." It doesn't work like that. They go back out and do what they do. Um, it's insane. It's an insane way of thinking. And I want this clear. I am not Republican or Democrat. I have no interest in two-party politics. But there is no civilized country that behaves like this, and there is no civilized country that just lets people aimlessly walk in. I'm all for immigration. We're all. I'm a grandchild of immigrants. We all most of the people I know are. I'm sure, at some point, someone in your family was. Maybe you were. Maybe a listener was, but we have to do it correctly. I research organized crime, and I know organized crime what they say. If I'm in Venezuela or I'm in Mexico or Haiti, and I'm an organized crime leader, I'm going to say, let's get some people and send them to the United States because we can make a lot of money there. We can grow, and they're not even going to put us in prison. You can just walk right in. So if I'm thinking that way, I have to wonder what these people are thinking. And it's just an insane way of thinking, really.
No, you're right. And so we're doing this documentary on, and that's one reason I wanted to talk to you today on the opioid epidemic, like I was talking to you about. And
Yeah.
one of the things we were taught, we had the luxury of being able to interview this really smart doctor, and he was pretty much saying how, in the last 20 years, since America has become kind of way more selfish and capitalistic, and everyone wants to make a dollar, we have like less and less people who are motivated to actually help others and try and make the country better. And that's just kind of like taken our country, downhill where and I have a responsibility to New York because I am involved in like a lot of community work. So it's bigger than myself, but there's not many people I know that are really trying to do that. It's all about them. Your best friend will stab you in the back over a couple of bucks. It's really just kind of like, I'm not losing hope. There's still great people, but I don't know. There has to be a change in how we operate here.
It really comes down a lot to like how a person, is raised, really. I mean, it doesn't cost anything to, teach your kids the right way. That said, though, I mean, I know many kids that, they had good parents, and you can only be a parent for so long, man. I know how I was when I was 15, 16 years old, and I had the two greatest parents you could have. And even I found myself wanting to misbehave. But yeah, I think you're right. Over the last 5, 10 years, we've really seen a shift in, people caring about other people. It's I want what I want right now, and I better get it. And it's not about, yeah, and that's why when I see things, good things, people doing things for someone, and our community doing something for someone, it does give me hope. And look, I'm not gonna say like we've always been, I mean, we've always been kind of a greedy country. I mean,
Yeah,
it's this has been going on for decades, but I don't know when the shift happened where we started acting like this. But I find myself all the time, and I don't know how old you are,
I'm
but 30 what?
33.
Okay, yeah, I'm 35, so we grew up around the same time. And I feel like I feel like it kind of changed around, I don't know, maybe 2015, and I don't want to be the guy that says, well, it was this one guy and he's now the president again. I'm not going to say it was those people, but I, I don't remember the division like this before that. I never, I remember when I was a kid, in the 2005, 2006 range, you know, people didn't not talk to you because you voted for someone some way. I put a tweet out today about, there's this film coming out with Robert De Niro where he plays Vito Genovese and Frank Costello. And I saw in the comments to the trailer, there were so many people. Oh, F Robert De Niro, that scumbag Democrat. And it's like these people have completely given up the fact that Robert De Niro is the greatest actor ever, and they won't watch the film because they don't agree with him politically. And I never remember that when I was younger. Like when I was a kid, it didn't work like that. Politics didn't control the life of most people like they do now. And I think that division has led a lot to it, where people don't want to be like, if someone knows someone is a supporter of the opposite person they like, they'll go out of their way to be mean. Plus, we also now have the added social media aspect where people will do anything for views. And it's a really destructive thing because we see people going and doing really effed up things to other people and to other people. And it's like, well, I got 10,000 views out of it. And it's like, well, yeah, but you're still an asshole. Like, why are you doing that? Like, I saw a story the other day, and I'm sure you've seen it, where there's this girl in England that her goal was to have sex with as many people as she could in one 24-hour period. And I look at her and I hear her talking, and when you look into her eyes, it's just like, how do you feel? Like I can see how you feel. Like and she's young and she doesn't think about where she'll be in 20 years. And it's like you almost feel bad for someone like that. It's like, how are you ever gonna have a family someday? How are you ever gonna be able to look your kids in the eye someday? It's kind of sad, man.
No, it is. And like you said, especially with like the media doing everything for views. And then also think about it over the like since 2015, how how consolidated media has gotten, right? Like it was already not that many people running everything we already see. And now it's like even less. So and then add like, add the hatred and like the Fox News machines and all of this stuff, and I'm not surprised of where we are right now. Anything can kind of be weaponized.
As you know, and this is something that I've kind of turned into a quasi, I report on the Mafia today, and I always am proud of saying that I'm not biased. I don't work for the Gotti family. I don't work for this informant or that. Like I don't have any bias. I just put out what I have, and that's that. And I guess the question I would have to anybody is like, where do you even go for news nowadays? It's pretty amazing. Every channel, as you just said, is biased. Fox News has the spin on the red side. CNN has the spin on the blue side. Where do you really go nowadays for quality, news? Another thing that really scares me is what happens when something really bad is going to happen. Like for instance, if 10 minutes from now we were instructed that a warhead was coming at New York City, I would probably say that 80 to 90% of the people wouldn't believe it was happening. Like they wouldn't know if it was real or not.
Yeah.
So it's like it's all kind of concerning, man. And I don't know where to go with it.
No, you're totally right, and I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions about just some topics real quick. I think it was I forget the guy's name. I saw him on your channel. He was like some guy that was worth a mobster, worth like 100 mil. I saw Diddy was like on his yacht or something. There was some story you did where he was a really interesting dude. And I wanted to ask you about him. I'm trying to get his name.
Recently, it was a short I put out.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a guy called John Rosati.
Yeah, that's it.
John Rosati is a guy who came up in Brooklyn. He was actually someone who, during the Third Colombo War, allegedly financed it on Vic Arena's behalf. He was made in the '80s alongside another guy, John Staluppi. They're both very close friends. And John Rosati essentially started, in the auto business. He created something called the Brooklyn Auto Mall, I believe it was called. Now he has dozens, hundreds of car dealerships around the country. He's invested in all sorts of businesses and food businesses and all sorts of things. And he's probably at this point worth several $100 million. I mean, his yachts, he's got tons of money, just a really wealthy guy. And, he is a reputed member of the Colombo crime family. Now, what's interesting about him is when I put that video out, I got multiple emails from, and I get them all the time from, and I do believe they were probably connected to him in some way. They're very nice. They'll say to me like, "Hey, we appreciate your work. Would you take that video down? What you said about Mr. Rosati is completely untrue, and it's all hearsay." And I always respond the same way, and I say, "Well, you're welcome to send a letter to me if you feel that it's wrong." But the problem that these guys have is there's FBI files detailing their behavior. And a lot of these guys, I mean, look, I don't come up to you and say, "Hey, I know you're a reputed member of the Lucchese crime family." You're not. There's nothing anywhere that says that. Um, it's not. I think a lot of folks that, especially these individuals that are Italian, they believe that it's all just a witch hunt. Well, you're only picking on me because I have an Italian last name, and it's, no, you've been photographed with these people. If you go to Brooklyn right now, you're not going to walk into a social club and they're just going to start hanging out with you. It doesn't work like that. They're members only. You get in there because you're part of that crew. It's pretty simple. And these people over the years have made it clear time and time again that they're involved in these things. And yeah, I just like to highlight people like that because they're interesting.
And yeah, they're really interesting. And then it like obviously we said earlier, it's not something you can retire from, right? But it's like, is he still involved? Like at that point, since he's so successful, like, is he still involved in that stuff? Like, how does that work? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm worth 200 mil. Why would I hang around that? Like,
Well, good question. Remember though, in the '80s, he wasn't worth 200 mil.
right, of course.
But I think the thought would be that he's still in some way kicking up to people. And I think I was asked that question. There's some younger people in the Gambino crime family that recently made kids in their 30s, kids that are not kids, they're adults, but they've made a lot of money earning. They have big homes, and someone asked me a question. Why would someone like that want to be a part of the mafia? And I think it's what we talked about earlier of being in the mafia has women love it. People like it. You have a certain way of carrying yourself, and you are protected by certain people. And in those neighborhoods, those people are still important people. So I think there's a matter of prestige.
You're 30, you're making all this money. Obviously, it's like a legendary thing to say, "Hey, I got made, I got my stripes, whatever." Like Christopher Moltisanti said, I can't be in places like this anymore. You can say cool stuff like that, but like, let's weigh the pros and cons. Like, wouldn't it just bring a lot of unnecessary heat? Like, I mean, I guess you can't say no, right? Like, how does that like happen? You know what I mean? It's like, what are the pros and cons really of that?
The,
Like in today's day, like if it happened today, like I get made today, let's say.
I think the thought with like someone like Rosati is it's not illegal to be in the mafia, right? So if John Rosati was made in the 80s and he just, occasionally gives an envelope to somebody, that's not illegal, especially because John Rosati is in legal businesses, right?
Right.
It's not illegal to give your friends money.
Yeah.
I mean, it just isn't. Now, I think in terms of the pros, they would be you can make money and you can get a part of something with some prestige still. Because remember, in Staten Island, I'll tell you this, and I don't know if you go to Staten Island, every kid in Staten Island that's Italian wants to be in the life. That's just how they are. They're all the same. That's how it is. And being a part of that, being a made guy still in some of these neighborhoods is still a big thing. And there's a lot of people, in places like South Philadelphia, Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Staten Island. They won't talk to me. They look at me as I'm a rat. They would never talk to me. And they have a certain sort of kind of you know submission to these people, and they want to be around them, they want to be seen with them. And I think a con would just be that you can go to jail, but I guess if you're not doing anything illegal, a little bit of bookmaking is not really going to put you into prison. And I think most mobsters say to themselves, well, nowadays we're not beating people up, we're not committing arsons, and we're not killing anybody. So if I have to do 2 to 4 years at some point, so be it. But there's a lot more pros than cons. I don't understand it. I wouldn't do it, but I can also tell you that I've talked to many guys that were in that life. I've met people that were in that life, um, and a lot of them will tell you the same thing. It looks like a fun life. I can see why people would be drawn to it, but the scrutiny that you're going to be under with law enforcement is it ain't worth it.
Yeah. And speaking of like the modern stuff, like what are some, if you don't mind talking about, like what do you think are some of the major like modern rackets that are still happening? Like what are the money makers now that the mob's into?
In terms of like the bread and butter stuff is still around, bookmaking, sports betting, that's still very much around because remember, even though there's FanDuel and DraftKings and all that stuff, if you go right now to Caesar Sportsbook and make bets, you got to put the money up. So if you want to bet $500, you got to put $500 up. Bookmakers on a local level, so ones that are mob controlled or mob agents, they will give you credit. So what they'll do is they'll come to you and they'll say, okay, you got 5,000 credit. So you can bet up to 5,000, lose up to 5,000 before you have to pay us. In terms of it's the same way, we settle up every week. If you owe $1,000, you owe us 1,000. If we owe you 1,000, we give you 1,000. So you don't have to put any money up. So you can bet one credit, which is nice. Loan sharking is still bread and butter industry. Most banks don't give anybody a loan. So in a small community like Astoria, Queens, or something like that, you go to the local loan shark. Hey, I need $2,000. Okay, I'll give you 2,000. Give me 260 a week for 10 weeks. You pay back 2,600. They make 600 in interest, and you get your 2,000. So people are willing to do that. As far as the big business. construction. I mean, the mob's still very involved in construction, bid rigging. So what they'll do is they'll find large construction projects, and they'll rid the bids. They'll get major companies in there. They'll rid the bids. They're also doing scams. I saw a scam recently with the Genovese crime family involving a person, Larry Weckert. Larry Weckert goes back to Tony Salerno, and his scams over the years have been. Recently, he did a scam where he was basically putting people, like low level people that worked for him. He was creating companies and basically getting minority and women grants, and the people weren't even in those positions and didn't even own the companies. He was basically scamming people. So construction's big. There's still union infiltration where they control unions. I mean, the Genovese crime family is still very much involved with the ILA and things like that. And there are still plenty of guys selling narcotics. Now they're definitely getting a little close to the sun doing that because selling narcotics is no longer good. But I would say construction's the big money maker.
They still are they still big in garbage?
I mean, there's still some involvement with waste removal. I mean, I think the problem now is that's such a regulated business now. The feds have really done a good job of stamping that out. But even up into the 2000s, I mean, there was a lot of involvement with the mafia and garbage pickup. I mean, at one point, the mafia controlled every bag of garbage that was picked up. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. They're making millions of dollars a month. Um, but not as much anymore. I mean, there's still mob controlled waste management, but I think shows like The Sopranos and some of the media has really hurt that. And there's a lot of scrutiny on those businesses. So it's not as big nowadays.
Because I saw, which I thought was so entertaining. I loved it. The thing about the Trashers on Netflix.
That was another thing. James Galante. Yeah, he was a big trash guy. And he controlled, most of Connecticut as far as waste management was concerned. You look at him, he was an associate of the mafia. He was kicking up to, Matty the Horse, who was,
Yeah,
you know,
digging
very
the point.
influential.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And then I have a couple more questions. So let's say, right, like I'm let's say I'm the first ever black guy to be in the mob, and I'm somehow a boss, which would never happen. But I see Jeff, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna make you, and let's talk about what type of rackets you get to get involved in. How are you gonna be an effective earner, but also stay low key in today's mob climate?
Um, well, I think the easiest thing is realizing that you're not going to go to them; they're going to come to you. So, and it works in terms of like you're an associate for years. You are an established person that can benefit someone in some way. So maybe you have you know, maybe you're a florist, right? You have a florist business, and inside that business, during from September until April, you're a bookmaker and you book college football, college basketball, the NFL, and the NBA. And that's your side business. And what a soldier is going to do is, let's say you live in Bensners and that soldier lives in that area. He's going to kind of align with you. He's going to put you on record with him. You're going to, for years, maintain a certain level of you're a good earner. You're kicking up to the right people. And he's going to come to you and maybe at some point say, hey, you should get your button now. And some people decline the button. Some people don't want it. But what I would do is probably bookmaking. Loan sharking is really easy money. I think the problem now though is, and it's just this truth, is people don't pay and you got to constantly chase people. And nowadays, you really don't have any ability. You're not going to like threaten them that you're going to kill them because nobody's killing anybody anymore. So I would tell you and I would tell me to not get involved with this business and, you know, go somewhere else where the mob isn't there and do the business there, be a bookmaker there. But I would say bookmaking, that's probably the most easy way to do things. And you're not going to be under that much government scrutiny.
For sure. And question. When I was watching a video, you said when someone gets made, obviously there's like certain rules, like you can't get with another made guy's wife, stuff like that. But then you also brought up something that was interesting where it said you can't buy any stocks, right? Like, can you dive into that a little bit more? Why is that?
I've heard there are certain families that have had those rules. I don't think they're real pronounced. I know many people that I'm sure dabble in stocks. In fact, the mob was involved in boiler rooms, stock scams, that sort of thing. I'm trying to remember what family that was at one point. I don't believe that's a rule at this point. The rules at this point are omerta, you're never talking to the police, that sort of thing. I don't think they can. To be honest, I don't think they could even. How would they even regulate that? Like they don't have your financial statements.
For sure.
Um, I forget where that family or what family that was, but yeah, I don't think that's a rule.
I think it was the video where the guy who married that correctional officer and then Vinny Gorgeous, I think he got involved with. I think it was that
Okay.
video. Um,
Uh, yeah, I don't remember offhand.
uh,
I can't say I've heard much in the way of stocks. I mean, I know the mob was involved with them, but yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
yeah, I'll try and send that to you. Just a
Yeah,
couple more questions, and I appreciate your patience with me.
absolutely, man.
In a really great conversation. I'm enjoying it.
I
But
agree.
so did you see the Five Families doc that the History Channel did?
I did. I did watch that. And some of that stuff is, for me watching it is, I mean, I've just heard all those stories so many times, but I did see that. Yeah.
Question. So if you could like sit down with maybe a couple mobsters and just like talk to them or like over your studying, like who's been the most interesting, like kind of wild? It doesn't have to be the smartest, but just like some of the most entertaining people that you've kind of like done some homework on or covered.
Number one would surely be Vincent Gigante. I mean, Gigante was a guy who came up as a boxer in Manhattan, Greenwich Village area. Um, Started working for the Mafia, the Genovese crime family, was given a task of whacking Frank Costello in Manhattan. He botched it, didn't do it correctly, and missed. And down the road, ultimately, became a member, became a captain, and eventually took over the family. And in the late '60s, he came up with the ruse of pretending that he was basically an invalid, a lunatic. He would walk the streets of New York in a bathrobe. He would pee on himself. He would go in the shower with his robe on, with an umbrella above him, and act stupid when the feds would come. He had this ruse, and in turn, at night he would control his family, and he was just a super interesting guy. Eventually, it obviously was all figured out, and he did died in prison, but. I always found it interesting that the way they were able to bust him. I recently spoke to an agent, Mike Campy, that was involved with bringing Chin down, and he said one of the things we did was he was in prison in 2001. September 11th happened, and they were tapping the phones in Fort Worth, Texas, where he was, and he began getting worried and he called home and they turned the tap on and he was talking about, did you see what happened? Were there kids inside? Is everybody okay? And the feds kind of said, well, he seems fine. He's talking, he's having conversations, and they kind of put all that together and kind of were able to bust him. He is just a really interesting guy, a guy that was so complex and fascinating. Another guy that I always wanted to speak to, I never got a chance to. Um, I will say that I was close. I wish he wouldn't have died because I had a connection through a family member to him that I could have spoke to him. Guy Joe Massino, he was the boss of the Bonanno crime family. He ruled with an iron fist, was very popular, really took the Bonanno crime family through a lot of tough times, the Donnie Brasco stuff and all that. And he eventually became, one of the biggest bosses in New York City during the 80s and 90s. He was arrested in 2003, was facing seven death sentences. He was convicted, and an hour after he was convicted, he made it clear that he wanted to cooperate, and he would become the first boss in New York history to flip and to testify. And what they did is they wired him up and they put him in MDC, and they got him recording, Vinny Gorgeous and several others. And one of the most interesting videos I ever did was I ended up getting in touch with a family member of his. He passed away in late 2023, and this person contacted me and we talked for 3 hours about his life and what it was like after he cooperated and what where he was, what happened to him, and I was able to document that, and it was pretty cool. So the mafia, and that's why I started this channel and this show. I wanted to tell the interesting stories of these people, the people that cooperated, didn't cooperate, some of their interesting things they had about them, and it's taken me all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, and Joe Massino, like he killed Carmine Galante, right? Like he was part of that.
He was a part of that. That was more or less the commission that did that.
Yeah.
Um, the commission, I think, was just that they just grown tired of Galanti, and that was kind of a grouping of people. But remember, Joe Massino was a protege of Philip Rastelli, who was kind of not dueling, but he was kind of the boss at that time, or becoming the boss at that time. So I think he obviously had a real interest in Massino, and Massino had a real interest in him. But no, Galanti was more of the commission that ordered that and put that in motion. But it was Bonanno people that did the work, and they kind of Massino and Rastelli were able to be the bosses next after that.
Right. And just as a black person, I have to obviously just talk about crazy Joe Gallo since he would put on brothers. Like what are your thoughts on him? He's an interesting character, I always thought.
He was another one of those revolutionaries. He didn't get in line, and he didn't follow the rules. I think Joe was a guy that marched to the beat of his own drum. He was definitely uh, kind of a free spirit, if you will. And he was one of those guys that was far too public. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and I thought the Irishman did a really good job of telling us who Joe Gallo was. He was this kind of bigger than life guy. He was hanging out with Jerry Orbach and all these celebrities, and I think at one point he was he became Buddhist. He was kind of this weird character, and I think I think one thing I will say is the mob doesn't like you getting away from the norm. Be who you are. Don't make big headlines. And you look at Joe Colombo. That was one of the reasons he was taken out. He was doing this anti-defamation league, and Joey Gallo. History will tell you that Joey Gallo had Joe Colombo kid, and that's completely untrue. Um, if you know, Joe Colombo was whacked by a person called Jerome Johnson, who was a black male who, if I've done research into his past, he did prison time. And he used to hang out at a place called, I believe, the Haymarket, it was called. It was a gay bar in Manhattan, and it was a Gambino place. And a lot of people believe that Carlo Gambino had Joe Colombo killed, and Mr. Johnson was given the contract to do it. I don't believe for a second Joe Gallo was involved. Now, it was easy to say he was because Joe, as you alluded to, was palling around with Nicky Barnes and a bunch of other black gangsters. But no, Joe Gallo needed to go. He didn't follow the rules. And as I've said time and time again, when you run off at the mouth and start doing stuff you're not supposed to do, the mob is going to put you in line and get rid of you because you're a liability at that point.
Right.
And that's what saw happen to Tony Spillatro, the guy you talked about that was played by Joe Pesci. He became a liability. A lot of these people become liabilities. And I believe absolutely. I think John Gotti probably faced that fate at some point. He just got so big that it would have been hard to do that. But I often think a video I'm going to do in the future is a video of what if John Gotti never existed? What would that family have looked like? And I'm going to kind of plan it out, like what I think would have happened. Because if you look at it, it would have been a fascinating thing to think about because remember after John Sr., John Jr. took over, and then Peter Gotti took over, and it's just a really interesting thing to think about. But yeah, Joe Gallo was also not killed by Frank Sheeran, like the Irishman tells you. That's untrue. That never happened. But Joey Gallo was killed because he didn't follow the rules.
And it also makes sense what you just said that Carlo did it because that was one of Carlo's many rackets was kind of shaking down gay bars, right? Like
Oh yeah. Yeah, he was big in that. He was him and certain others were huge in the maturation of not only gay clubs but trans clubs. And what the mafia basically said was, you know, we don't care what you do. And back then, remember, I mean, a lot of really prestigious people were homosexuals or closeted homosexuals. And you look at someone like a Roy Cohn, who was one of the most well-known defense attorneys in the history of this country. That's what started some of the extortion tactics of those times. There was a group called, and I'm not even kidding, the Gay Mafia, where Roy Cohn would basically extort people because he knew the secrets that they had that they didn't want out there. They're very powerful people. And, he was able to kind of wheel and deal for customers. I mean, there's a reason that he was able to get customers in his law practice such great deals. He had very concerning information they didn't want out there. And I think the mafia, as long as they can make money, they don't care what it involves. And we talked about the guy Matty the Horse, the guy that was involved with the Netflix guy. He was huge in the '70s in Times Square. Times Square, as I'm sure you know, back then was a hellscape. It was a den of iniquity. It was a very like kind of red light district type of area. And Matty owned every peep show, bar, porn theater in the area. And from what I understand, there were some very, very disgusting and depraved things that went on in some of those places. Um, and Matt kind of said, we have something for everybody down here. This is where you come to get your rocks off, and they catered to everybody.
Yeah, yeah, they were all about a dollar. That area I hear was just yeah, real sleazy. And
Yes, it was.
speaking of a couple more questions. Speaking of Roy Cohn, did you see the Apprentice movie?
I haven't watched it yet. That said, I think it's probably really well done. I think Jeremy what's his name? Jeremy Strong's really good. I mean, he was really good in Succession, and I've gotten the feeling it's probably pretty damn good. But yeah, Roy Cohn was a cutthroat guy. He was a great attorney. I mean, he was an attorney for Fat Tony, and I mean, he was. If you remember, John Gotti in the early '70s was involved with the hit on Jimmy McBratney out in Staten Island. John Gotti essentially whacked a guy on a barroom floor and got 4 years, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, uh,
So
yeah,
yeah, I haven't seen The Apprentice yet, but I've heard it's quite good.
yeah. I saw it. I think you would enjoy it. And yeah, Roy Cohn was. They just say such a genius in court. Like he would read kind of what the case was on the ride over to court, and just he was just kind of that good at what he did.
Well, and he also worked, he's a really sleazy guy where, you know, listen, he blackmailed people.
Oh,
It's pretty simple, and yeah, that's a sign of a good lawyer. No one said lawyers weren't sleazy.
oh, of course. So tell me this. What are some of the goals with the channel? I'm loving what you're putting out. Like, what are some of the next steps? Where are you trying to go with your media career and kind of life right now?
Yeah, I mean, in 2025, I kind of told myself that, I want to go from doing more than just, videos in my office here. I want to take it to kind of the next level. I also want to get out and do things like this, where I'm kind of trying to grow the genre and getting onto some bigger podcasts and trying to kind of take it to the next level. One thing that I am working on, I can't tell you who it is, but I am working on bringing someone out of the shadows, a person that was in the life that wants to tell his story, and I'm going to work with him on that. That should be out in probably the first quarter of the year. I'm kind of working on that now. Um, I'm also working on the first stages of I want to write multiple books, not just one. One book that I have an idea for is really pretty simple. It's really just kind of a catalog of everything that I've done on my channel. Some of the best interviews I've done and kind of getting them into print form. But I'm also kind of starting out a book that I've always wanted to write on a guy I mentioned, Kabani Savage. He was a really deranged drug trafficker from Philadelphia. He was probably the most dangerous person in the history of this state. And, I really want to kind of start putting some time into writing a book about him and, just kind of grow what I'm doing. I feel like in 3, 4 years, I've turned something into something kind of cool. And and I kind of want to take it to the next level. I also want to down the road do documentaries that you're going to see on Netflix or Amazon Prime, and really just try to grow this genre and to get it into the houses of people that haven't heard about it.
Nice. No, I love that. And are you still doing stuff with Barstool?
No, so I worked at Barstool two different times. I left in what was it? So it would be June of 24. Yeah, so it's been, what was it, 24? Yeah, it's been almost no, it's almost 2 years now. It's been no, I left Barstool and I kind of put it in my rear view. You know, when you do what I do, I can just make more money on my own. Working for one company is really difficult. And I like working on my own and being in control of everything I'm doing. And, occasionally I'll have a back and forth with someone that works there on social media or something. But no, I do everything on my own. I work independently with everything, whether it's sports or with this side of things. So, no, I want to own everything I do. It's important.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, I love that. And what are some like do you watch any other like mob channels? Like how do you kind of do your research? Any like, other
Um, well,
stuff?
I don't no, I don't really watch other channels. A lot of the research I do really comes from I do a lot of look into like genealogy, that sort of thing, understanding and piecing together where people come from. I also scour through a lot of like newspapers. There's a newspaper archive site I use that can kind of take it from a 10-year period and it can pinpoint stuff. So, and I kind of use court records, indictments. I go through, I also speak to people. I mean, I've done videos on people that, I really just kind of got together with somebody that knew these people personally and kind of pieced it all together that way. But if you saw the way I did a video, you probably wouldn't believe it. I mean, I really just kind of sit here like I am and I kind of just like the pictures that are on the screen, I'm clicking them as I'm doing the video, and it's really just off the top of my head. I don't have a script. I just kind of put it in my head and that just comes from years of sitting in front of a camera and explaining something. And I think the way I do videos is really easy to understand. I think sometimes when people do videos, they're going and they're talking about one thing and then they don't wrap it up and they start talking about something else. And my videos, I always want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to the video. So like I want you to leave and say, okay, I learned everything I wanted to learn, and now I can go to the next person. And that's when I started the podcast and I started as a podcast, that's what we did. The video was about one person, and you didn't have to watch, like, you could watch episode 3 and then you could listen to episode 130 and it wouldn't matter. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to every episode.
Yeah, I mean, after talking to you, I kind of can see that. You're very like, there's not many ums or it's pretty smooth. You kind of have it all
Well, that
together.
just comes from, I mean, that just comes from so long, like doing this for so long. I mean, I've been doing content, whether it's sports betting or this kind of thing since 2009. I think that was the first video I ever did was in 2009. And it I remember it, man. There was a long period of time when I first started doing this where I remember I started a show. It was probably 2011 maybe. I started a show on something called Spreaker. I don't know if you know what that is. It was like an audio platform where it would post to Twitter. You could like say, I'm live, and it would post like it does now. But back then it was really cool. You could do it. And people could log into this portal and like listen to you, like live streams. And I remember when I first started it, like 3 people watched it in like a week, and it was all me. It was just me listening to it over. But I didn't care because I was just trying to get an understanding of how to do this, sit in front of a camera and talk. And I guess you just grow and you go from there.
Yeah, that's incredible because, I mean,
And there are so many days where I get like really discouraged. Like I don't like this is a cutthroat genre. There's a lot of low life people I have to deal with. And we constantly have to hear, well, what do you know? You don't live in New York, you're not Italian, you're not in like you know, it's not easy to do it. And there's a lot of work you put into doing this. Like it's like on a Saturday when I start doing a video at like 11, I'm not done with it till like I put it out at like 3, 4 o'clock. Like it takes time. And when I do a video, I'm not doing it like half-assed. I want you to learn something new about these people. And I've done about 600 videos on my channel, and I mean, a lot of them are about people no one's ever heard about, and I like to do I really kind of get off on, not literally, but I really get happy when I can put a video out in an interview I've done with someone that has never spoken. And I've put out more people that have never been heard from than anybody. And I want to make this genre something bigger because it is a small little group of people, but a lot of people find the mafia interesting. So I want to put a video out and I want you to learn something and I want you to get something out of it. That takes time to do so.
No, for sure. And then like, I mean, what is that like? Like, what is like some of the negative stuff? Like, I'm sure you get emails. Like, how do you? What's that like side of it like?
Oh, I think to be honest, I mean, most of the emails I get are pretty positive. I to me, it's more of just like some of the commenters and some of the other creators. They're just kind of assholes, really. But I think 90% of the people I deal with are cool people. They like this stuff. They like to participate and contribute to what I'm doing. And there are a few people that are pricks in the end, but mostly it's positive. We've been able to grow, and this is not in the mob genre is not particularly huge. It's not easy to grow in doing. So, I'm pushing almost to 100,000, and that was always my goal. When I started, getting that plaque. For someone like me that's been in content for a long time. I mean, look, I didn't do it the easy way. I went to a genre that's hard to grow in. It's hard. You can get 100,000 pretty easily. Most people on YouTube now, if you're in the right genre. I did it all the hard way, and getting that plaque is something that will be real important to me because I've always done it the hard way. I don't, I hate to be literal, but nowadays, like I'm not an attractive female. I don't have, a bunch of money or big, whats. I can't, there's nothing I can really advertise. I got to just kind of be good at something. And I guess maybe I found that niche. And, when I get to that 100,000, that will be kind of my swan song. So,
Yeah.
I don't know what the future holds, but people like this and they keep watching it, so I'll keep doing it.
No, that's great, and I wish you nothing but the best, obviously. In terms of like any advice you would maybe give other content creators maybe watching this, like maybe a couple tips from your journey.
Yeah, I would say like one thing is if you're gonna do it, do it. Don't come in half-assed and like, you know, put out content just randomly. You have to be consistent. You have to put out like I put out videos Tuesdays and Saturdays. Like like every week you're gonna get 2 videos from me. And I always am stand I put them out. Consistent with it. You have to be consistent. You have to like what you're doing too. You can't do it for a few weeks and then stop. You're not gonna get any consistency. I've also learned that like if you're on YouTube, um, the title, the thumbnail videos is insanely important. And I think that's something that took me a long time to realize. I was on YouTube for years and I never really understood like why aren't the videos getting views? Why aren't people watching them? And look, the truth is anybody can create content, but you got to get people to watch it. And I think just learning the little things about YouTube. And I've changed my thumbnail approach multiple times. I finally feel like I've gotten to a good spot with that. But it may sound stupid, but the thumbnail is important. You look at a YouTube, right? You click home and you look at a video and you say, okay, what got me to click on that video? And it's like, it's interesting when you think about the kind of the science behind it. But I would say be consistent. Obviously, put the right thumbnails and titles out there. And I would also tell people, and this might come across as a little bit arrogant, but I would tell you to not get involved with it. I would tell you to do something else. I mean, everybody's doing this, man. It's not an easy racket to be in, and unless you find a niche, there's just not a lot of things that get a lot of like I wouldn't go into what I'm doing. Like go into like food or something, like eat food or something. Like that's fun, you know, that's something that you can always do. The world that I'm in, like I have to deal a lot with like they won't put my videos out because I violate a policy or I'm talking about something that they don't want me to talk about. And I would say if you're going to get into this world, do something wholesome that's going to get you a lot of views and it's easy, doesn't take up a lot of time and money, and you'll enjoy doing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess I have actually two more questions left. So one is you have a dinner reservation with five bosses from actually they could be five bosses from either any crime family or like any organized crime background. They don't have to be mafia related. Who would you want to have dinner with?
Five. John Gotti,
Yeah.
Vincent Gigante,
Yeah.
who, by the way, they hated each other. Um, Joey Massino,
Yeah.
El Mencho.
El Mencho. I don't know about him.
El Mencho is the head of the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, probably the most influential drug trafficker on the planet.
Okay.
Um, and a guy named Paolo DeLoro. Paolo DeLoro was boss in Naples, Italy. He was the head of a Camorra clan, based out of northern Naples, Seconda Liano. He was probably probably one of the more wealthy drug traffickers in the history of Italy. I mean, he had the largest open air drug market over a 20-year period in Naples. Just made an astounding amount of money. And just a really interesting guy. He had 10 children. They were all boys. And they all became mobsters. And um, if you've ever seen the show Gomorrah, which is the greatest show ever made, um,
Gamora?
Gomorrah, yeah, it's on HBO Max. The character Pietro is actually the influence by Paolo DeLoro. So, yeah, I would say Paolo DeLoro, John Gotti, Joe Massino, Chin Gigante, and El Mencho. That would be my
Oh, okay,
five.
Gamora. I'm gonna check it out. I'm
I
surprised.
would highly recommend it, bro. You watch it in Italian, you'll get used to the subtitles within 5 minutes, and in a few months when you're done with it, you come back and tell me how much you like. You'll tell me, I guarantee you'll tell me it's the best show you've ever watched, probably.
In terms of that, like any iconic restaurants where you would host this dinner?
Um, yeah, I would probably say Rayo's, which I mean you're familiar with
Trying
being
to
from
lay that up.
Harlem.
I was hoping you were gonna say that.
Yeah, I don't know if it would fit all of us. That's a lot of people. And there's some rotund people in that group that I just told you. But yeah, I would say Rayo's. I mean, I'll kind of end with this. What I find so interesting about the Genovese crime family in Harlem is if you look back to the original, the mafia coming to this country, a lot of people don't realize that the mafia started in America in the 1890s in New Orleans, actually. The first major, real mob boss in New York was a person called Giuseppe Morello. They called him the Old Fox, and he was based out of at Harlem. And you look at the mafia today, the Genovese family, the power base is still in Harlem. 120 years later. And it's fascinating. And I think Harlem is to me really East Harlem is the birthplace of the mafia in this country. And what's so interesting is in the tens and twenties and thirties, I mean, Harlem was the power base of Italian America. I mean, it was the Little Italy of New York, and I think Rayo's just should be kind of an iconic place. Sparks obviously would be a good one too. That would be an interesting place for John Gotti to go, I think. But yeah, I would say Rayo's. Rayo's is also so hard to get into, so I think I've never been, but I would love to someday.
What are your There's so many. So I'm gonna say like top 10. Like what are your top 10 favorite like mob movies? You could throw some like, you obviously we're in Harlem, so shout out to Paid in Full, but like, you can go mob movies if you want. If you want to throw in some other ones, you can.
Best mob movie of all time is the Gotti HBO version. I think
I love it.
it's incredibly well done. Asante's really good. Number two, The Irishman. I love The Irishman. I think it's a fantastic movie. I think the last 45 minutes are, I mean, just it's incredible. I think, facing one's own mortality is quite scary to think about, and I think that's really one of the reasons I started this show is because I watched the film and I said to myself, wow, this guy went his whole life, he did all these terrible things, he ostracized everybody, his family wanted nothing to do with him, and the last hour or so was about his choices catching up to him, and he picked out his own casket alone. He's constantly trying to relive that all the things he did, everybody's gone. And in the one of the last scenes, the nurse is taking his blood pressure and he has a photo of Jimmy Hoffa. And Jimmy Hoffa at one point was this powerful guy. He was so powerful. And the girl doesn't even know who he is. And I think he realizes at that point, wow, I did all this and I'm gonna die alone. This is it. This is the end. And I think it's just really, really, really just profound. I would say a few others that I really like. I mentioned Gomorrah, it's a TV show, but there's also a film. It was filmed in 2008. It's just one thing about the Camorra, they completely have overtaken society in Naples. Everything that's done goes through the Camorra. It's truly a dominatingly depraved organization, very evil
Spell
group.
it?
Um, Say that again.
How do you spell it? Is it with a G?
Yeah, it's a Gomorrah.
Okay.
A couple others that I really like. Casino is obviously terrific. Um, A Bronx Tale is a great movie. It's one of my favorites. I grew up watching that film. I love Paid in Full. I'm trying to. American Gangster is a great movie. It's not exactly factual, but it's very good. Trying to think of other ones. There's a bunch of prison movies I really like. There's a film Shot Caller I think is awesome. Starred Up, really good movie. Um, I don't want to be corny, but I love State Property when I was a kid. I used to like that movie a lot. It's
Me
kind of
too.
goofy, but you know,
Who is this? It's Friday. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's just all those movies are great. Like those, those old like 2000s movies. I'm trying to think of one or two others that are kind of off the beaten path. Wow.
where do you rank the Godfathers?
Um, I gotta tell you, they're not. There's a bunch of things I'd rather do for 3 hours than watch The Godfather. I mean, obviously I've seen them. I think The Godfather 2 is the elite Godfather, for sure. I would say they're in the middle. I think Goodfellas for that matter as well. I just know the story so well. And Henry Hill is a total scumbag, low life. Most of the stories weren't even true. They were mostly about other people. I actually really like Donnie Brasco as well. I think Donnie Brasco is a really well done movie. I
Yeah.
thought Johnny Depp was really good, and some of the other roles, Michael Madsen as Sonny Black, Lefty Guns. I mean, I think one of the best scenes in mob movie history is when Sonny or not Sonny Lefty, takes off all his jewelry and you know kind of realizes that he's going to his death. Now, in real life, that didn't happen, but um, it's a pretty profound scene.
Yeah, yeah. What are your? I was gonna name another movie. Oh, speaking of Johnny Depp, did you like Black Mass?
Somebody asked. I was on TikTok live last night. Somebody asked me that. It's all right. Um, I found Depp's character to be kind of evil, and kind of creepy, but that's how Whitey Bulger really was. So,
Yeah,
I think in the end, he actually did a great job. I don't know. I don't find Boston as interesting as some of the other cities. I think Departed is way better, for
yeah,
that matter. But we talk about organized crime, like The Town. That's a great movie.
that is good.
Like I would much rather watch that over like Black Mass or something else. But yeah, I think I would tell you, in terms of if you're interested in like film about like urban stuff, there's a director, and he's actually the director of Gomorrah, the film I told you about, and the movie I told you about. Stefano Salima. He's probably right now my favorite director. He did a couple of movies in this country. He did a film called Without Remorse. Michael B. Jordan was in it. He did the Sicario, second Sicario. He's done some just great movies. I like that kind of stuff, like urban warfare type stuff,
Yeah.
stuff about urban stuff, and I really like that sort of thing.
You
So
a fan of Narcos?
I did. I like Narcos. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you
Um,
like I like personally I like the Mexico ones the best, but like
I
what do
do
you
too. I
I
do
thought
too.
the Felix Miguel, I just the
Miguel
fact that
Guard.
he's trying to organize all of those like kind of other groups, I just thought he was kind of just a little bit more crafty than like it was just more complicated when he was dealing with the plazas and how he made all that work. I thought that was really interesting.
And again, when we look at like modern day, like that's like I'm super fascinated in like how cartels were created, like, and there's so many things about those groups that like we that aren't true either. Like modern media will tell you that like El Chapo Guzman was the head of the Sinaloa cartel. It's like, well, he wasn't. There was a guy above him, El Mayo, and yeah, Gallardo is actually still alive, which is crazy. But yeah, I preferred the Mexico ones over the Colombia. I just know the Pablo Escobar story so well. It's like I'm just tired of hearing about it. But yeah, there's so much great stuff out there, and you just got to keep being willing to watch it, and you'll see something better than the last thing always.
No, for sure. Well, listen, I don't want to take too much time. I really appreciate talking with you. This was so much fun. I'm I'm like learning a lot. Where we had the pleasure of interviewing Dapper Dan and so many incredible people. So I'm trying to like just talk to people that are obviously our niche and bread and butter is Harlem, but we like to kind of branch out because it's so connected with everything. So I really appreciate
I
you.
think maybe when I come up there and I'll come see you. I'd love to talk to you more about people like Frank Matthews and some of the Harlem guys back in the day, because one thing that I'll just end it on is one thing that is a major myth, and I know you probably know this, is the thought is that the mafia did not sell narcotics, which is a complete joke. It's a total myth. We mentioned Galante. He was probably the biggest drug trafficker as a mobster. But, up in Harlem, up on Pleasant Avenue, I mean, those corners back in the day, I mean, the Lucchese and Genovese crime families were making untold amounts of money. A lot of those guys were the connects to the Nicky Barnes, the Frank Lucases, and then you had your Frank Matthews, who no one really ever talks about.